When I first moved into Clearwater Shores, I thought I'd found peace. The neighborhood curled around a pristine lake, every house with a dock and an American flag fluttering lazily in the breeze. It was the kind of place where kids rode bikes without helmets and neighbors waved whether they knew your name or not. For a moment, I let myself believe I'd left chaos behind. Then I met Karen Westfield. Karen was the self-appointed queen of the Homeowners Association, a tightly wound woman in pressed khakis and oversized sunglasses who patrolled the neighborhood like it was a military base. She knew every rule in the HOA handbook by heart and considered herself both judge and executioner. My first interaction with her involved a passive-aggressive note about my garbage bins being too visible from the street. I hadn't even unpacked my boxes yet. At first, I tried to play along. I attended the meetings, nodded politely, and paid my dues. But it was clear early on, compliance wasn't enough. Karen demanded submission. If she sensed defiance, even imagined it, you became a target. I didn't become a target until the Bayliner showed up. My boat was nothing fancy, 22 feet, white hull, navy trim, a little weathered. My dad and I had restored it together before he passed, and keeping it docked behind my house was my way of keeping him close. It was registered, clean, and parked exactly where the HOA guidelines said it could be. I had the paperwork to prove it. But Karen didn't care about paperwork. What she cared about was control. She started with little things. Fines for phantom violations. A complaint about the boat's color scheme not being aesthetically consistent. Warnings about maritime noise levels, though I hadn't even started the engine. It was harassment disguised as regulation. Then one morning it was gone. I stepped out with a coffee in hand, expecting the usual glassy stillness of the lake, only to find a gaping void where my boat should have been. The dock line had been sliced. Panic surged through me. I scanned the water, thinking maybe it had drifted, until I saw it, 3 houses down, tied neatly to Karen Westfield's dock. Only it wasn't my boat anymore. She'd repainted the hull in a garish shade of white and slapped a new name across the back in gold block letters, the Queen Bee. I marched down the lakeside path, heart pounding, disbelief mutating into fury. Karen stood on her patio in a wide-brimmed sun hat, sipping a mimosa as if nothing was out of place. "You stole my boat," I said, my voice flat and cold. Karen didn't blink. It was impounded by the HOA. The HOA doesn't own boats. It doesn't even have storage authority. She smirked. "You violated Article 9B, excessive obstruction of shoreline view. The board voted for removal. Consider it reassigned." There was no vote. "I don't need to explain myself to someone who refuses to respect community standards," she replied, turning her back on me like a curtain falling at the end of a scene. I stood there, dumbstruck, adrenaline fizzing in my blood. I could feel neighbors watching from behind curtains and hedges, too cautious or too afraid to intervene. Karen had ruled the HOA with an iron will for years, and people had learned it was safer to stay silent. But I wasn't built for silence. I filed a police report. The officer, a young guy with the expression of someone just trying to survive the day, told me it was a civil matter. "She's technically the HOA president," he said, shrugging. "If the bylaws back her up, there's not much we can do without a court order. So someone can just take your property and rebrand it if they have a clipboard and a rulebook?" He didn't answer. That night, I sat on my dock, staring at the glint of my father's boat floating behind Karen's house. Repainted, renamed, but still unmistakably his. Mine. The moonlight shimmered across the water, deceptively calm. Karen had drawn first blood. She thought she'd won. But what she didn't know was that I'd spent 12 years in the Navy, 5 of them in naval intelligence. I knew how to gather evidence. I knew how to follow trails. And I knew how to bring down people who thought they were untouchable. Karen had stolen the wrong man's boat. And I was about to remind her that theft, especially the kind hidden behind fake rules and phony authority, always has a price. Karen underestimated me. She mistook my silence for surrender, my calm for compliance. But if there was one thing 12 years in the Navy taught me, it was how to wage a quiet war. I didn't rant. I didn't scream. I watched. I listened. And I started digging. The HOA handbook, which Karen treated like gospel, became my blueprint. I cross-referenced every citation she had ever quoted. Buried in its 97 pages of dense legalese was Article 9b, the same rule she claimed justified taking my boat. It did mention obstructions of communal views, but only in reference to permanent structures. Docks. Fences. Boats weren't even mentioned. I took that as my first breadcrumb. Next came the minutes from the last 3 HOA meetings, publicly available, though Karen clearly never expected anyone to read them. Not a single mention of a vote to remove or reassign personal property. No motion. No record. Nothing. She had lied. I drove across town to meet Rachel Mendelson, a sharp-witted real estate attorney and fellow Clearwater resident. She'd once been fined for unapproved flora after planting tulips. We'd bonded over a shared distaste for Karen's reign. Your boat was stolen, straight up, Rachel said, scanning the documents I brought. There's no legal mechanism for the HOA to seize private property, even with a vote. What she did was unlawful impersonation of authority, possibly fraud, depending on how she registered it. She re-registered it, I said. I checked. The boat's got a new title number under a nonprofit called Clearwater Lakes Preservation Society. Rachel's eyebrows shot up. That doesn't exist. I've handled title transfers before. Nonprofits get exemptions, but they have to be legit. That was the second breadcrumb. I called in a favor from my old friend Cam, who now worked cybersecurity for a federal contractor. He owed me for an incident in Kandahar involving a sandstorm, 2 goats, and an ill-timed satellite call. Send me what you've got, Cam said. I'll look into her digital footprint. By the next morning, he had answers. Karen had created a shell nonprofit 6 months ago. No tax ID, no filings, no web presence. Just a name and a P.O. box registered to the HOA clubhouse. But she'd used it to retitle not just my boat, but a golf cart, a kayak, and even a neighbor's jet ski. She's pulling this trick on other people? I asked. Cam snorted. She's got a little pirate empire going, hiding behind phony nonprofit paperwork. You're not the first, just the first to push back. With everything compiled, meeting minutes, forged titles, shell organization, and photos of my boat's transformation, I packaged the evidence into a dossier and submitted it through the FBI's online public corruption portal. Normally, those tips vanish into the abyss. But not this one. Within 12 hours, I got a call from a bureau agent named Alvarez. He asked pointed questions. Wanted source documents, timestamps, contact info. When I mentioned Karen's fake nonprofit and her pattern of confiscating assets, his tone sharpened. This might go beyond HOA overreach, he said. If she's falsifying documents and leveraging fake legal authority to seize property, that's wire fraud. Possibly racketeering. She's been doing this for years, I told him. The whole neighborhood's afraid of her. Then maybe it's time someone reminded her that the law works both ways. By the next morning, the FBI had boots on the ground. Unmarked cars cruised past Karen's house. Neighbors whispered behind closed blinds. The usual buzz of lakefront life dimmed to a quiet murmur, like the air before a thunderstorm. But Karen? Karen doubled down. She hosted a community brunch that day, invited only HOA board loyalists. She posed with my boat, handed out flyers about new shoreline standards, and made a speech about upholding neighborhood values. It was theater. The last gasp of a tyrant who hadn't realized the curtain was already falling. That night, Rachel sent me a text. FBI requested HOA financials from the treasurer. She's panicking, said Karen made side deals with vendors. My pulse quickened. The scope was widening. What began as a personal injustice was unraveling into something systemic, layers of deception hidden beneath garden parties and lakeside barbecues. Karen hadn't just stolen my boat. She'd built an empire of theft. And soon, every piece of it would be exposed. The neighborhood was holding its breath. You could feel it in the way people walked slower past Karen's house, pretending not to look while clearly searching for signs, badges, agents, handcuffs. You could hear it in the quiet clinking of coffee mugs at the local cafe, where gossip swirled like steam but no one dared speak too loudly. Clearwater Shores was no longer calm, it was coiled. And Karen? She was unraveling. I caught her pacing her back patio at dawn, phone glued to her ear, gesturing wildly. The mimosa glass was gone. The confident posture replaced by tight shoulders and darting eyes. Whatever power she thought she had was slipping, and she knew it. But the fall of a tyrant is never clean. They claw, they bluff, and they lash out. That morning, I received an official-looking envelope on my doorstep, an HOA citation accusing me of unlawful surveillance of board members. Attached was a cease and desist order typed in bold red font, citing fabricated bylaws and threatening legal action if I didn't withdraw false claims against the association. It would have been laughable if it wasn't so desperate. Rachel reviewed the document and chuckled. This isn't even legal.
She's trying to intimidate you.
Karen's playing house lawyer with a fake badge. But it wasn't just me. Word began spreading that other residents had received similar warnings. Anyone who had spoken out about their fines, their confiscated items, their suspicions. Karen was trying to plug a dam with duct tape. Then came the first real crack. Mr. and Mrs. Harper, quiet retirees who lived on the cul-de-sac, walked into the HOA meeting that evening with a file folder. Mr. Harper, normally as mild as a church mouse, set it on the table with shaking hands and looked Karen straight in the eye. "These are our tax records," he said, voice tight with emotion. "You charged us $4,200 for a patio violation. We found out last week that only $200 went to the association's account. The rest was deposited into something called the Preservation Society." Gasps rippled through the room. Karen's face turned to stone. "That's slander," she hissed. "It's evidence," Rachel interjected, stepping forward with a calm that sliced sharper than any shout. "And it's being shared with federal authorities." Karen stood, knocking over her chair. "This is a witch hunt. This is insubordination against your elected leadership." "No, Karen," I said, stepping into the center. "This is justice knocking at your door." As if summoned by cue, two plainclothes FBI agents entered through the back of the clubhouse, flashing badges and asking for Karen Westfield by name. You could have heard a pin drop or a career crumble. Karen's eyes widened. For a moment, she looked smaller than I'd ever seen her. Vulnerable.
Cornered.
"I want my attorney," she stammered. "You'll get one," Agent Alvarez replied. "But first, we have some questions about wire fraud, misuse of nonprofit funds, and theft of registered watercraft." Every head in the room turned. Karen opened her mouth, but no words came. One agent gently took her elbow, guiding her toward the exit. The other turned to the room. "If anyone has information related to unauthorized HOA fines, seized personal property, or financial irregularities," he said, "we encourage you to come forward." And just like that, the fear broke. Hands went up. Voices rose. Years of quiet resentment erupted in a tide of testimony, stories of manipulated votes, mysterious budget line items, threats, retaliation, lies. It wasn't just my fight anymore. Karen had burned too many bridges, trampled too many boundaries. And now the community she'd tried to control had become her reckoning. Later that night, as the clubhouse emptied out and the last murmurs of shock gave way to vindication, I walked down to my dock. The water was still. The stars were out. And across the lake, Karen's house stood dark, silent for the first time in years. I exhaled deeply, not in triumph, but in release. It wasn't over yet. There were hearings to come, an audit underway, and likely months of cleanup to repair the damage she'd done. But the queen had fallen, and justice was no longer a whisper in the shadows. It only took 48 hours from the FBI's visit to Karen's front porch for everything to unravel. The next morning, a convoy of black SUVs and a white evidence van rolled into Clearwater Shores like a silent army. They didn't use sirens. They didn't need to. Power in this town had always been about presence, and Karen no longer had any. I watched from my porch as agents wheeled out boxes from her garage. HOA files, financial records, electronics, and my boat's original registration documents. Proof she hadn't just stolen a vessel. She'd tried to erase its very identity. But the cherry on top? They seized her pontoon boat, an oversized party barge she flaunted at every HOA holiday gala like it was a crown jewel. I saw it towed away on a flatbed, confiscated under suspicion of being bought with laundered funds. The irony hit like thunder across the lake. By noon, news trucks had camped outside the neighborhood entrance. Clearwater Shores, once known for its manicured hedges and passive-aggressive lawn signs, had become the epicenter of a suburban scandal. HOA corruption, federal charges, neighborhood uprising. Reporters swarmed like vultures over a feast. And amid all that chaos, the community changed. People came out of their homes, not to gossip or gawk, but to connect. Lawn chairs popped up along driveways. Kids rode bikes again without worrying about citations for unsupervised activity. The Harper's tulips bloomed freely without threat of removal. It felt lighter, like someone had opened a window in a suffocating room. Rachel and I spearheaded an emergency town hall the following weekend. No Karen, no loyalists, just neighbors ready to rebuild. We voted unanimously to dissolve the current HOA board and implement a provisional committee until legal restructuring could be completed. I declined nominations, but offered to help revise the charter. Rachel accepted the interim president role, reluctantly but resolutely. "We don't need tyrants," she said during the meeting. "We need neighbors." The room erupted in applause. As for Karen, the charges were swift and public. Fraud. Falsification of documents. Misuse of nonprofit status. Illegal seizure of property. She posted bail, but her name was everywhere, on the news, in the court docket, and whispered at every grocery store aisle. She moved out quietly 3 weeks later. No farewell. No explanations. Just a for sale sign slapped on her once untouchable mansion. But justice isn't just about what's taken away. It's about what's returned. 2 days after her departure, I received a call from Agent Alvarez. "We're releasing your boat," he said. "It's intact. We'll arrange for it to be brought back." I didn't ask for any fanfare. I just stood by the dock when the flatbed arrived and watched as my boat, paint job undone, name restored, was lowered gently back into the water where it belonged. It bobbed slightly, like it remembered me. Like it, too, had survived something unjust. And for the first time in weeks, I took it out onto the lake. The breeze was soft. The sun warm. The shoreline sparkled like a promise. As I steered past Karen's now vacant lot, I let myself smile. Not out of spite, but relief. The story wasn't just mine anymore. It belonged to every neighbor who had been silenced, every voice ignored, every injustice endured in the name of control. I cut the engine and sat there a while, letting the ripples stretch outward across the glassy water. The boat, the lake, the peace, they were mine again. Not because I fought to reclaim them, but because I refused to let them be taken.